Hello, my name is Tom Gray. I am a certified PMP project manager with 13 years experience managing Department of Defense, aerospace, infrastructure, and most recently solar factory development, which includes the definition, development, and procurement of various process tools for the 400 megawatt factory. So this presentation will primarily be used to discuss project planning and monitoring and control. So much of what will be discussed during this presentation is standard PMBOK, that's Project Management Book of Knowledge teachings. But I will be discussing how I have tailored these teachings and developed methods and tools in order to manage my projects for success and efficiency. The PMBOK is a book of knowledge that is designed to be used in a tailored fashion. It is not a rule book that must be followed to the detail it is written. It provides the knowledge of what could be used in project management. So I've tailored my projects for the maximum efficiency with a goal to spend as much time with my stakeholders as possible and the least time analyzing and reporting on performance, which I will be discussing throughout this presentation. So I've found through experience that the most important phase of a project is the planning phase. The more time and detail you put into this phase, the more likely you will be successful to meeting your goals on schedule, budget, quality, and of course customer satisfaction. I believe that a charter should be developed for every project because it provides a high level of what the project is meant to achieve. It also serves as a contract between the sponsor, the person or group authorizing and paying for the project, and you, the project manager. It will also work as the foundation for a formal kickoff. Defining who the stakeholders are is critical, and I'm not just talking about the team and the sponsor and the customer, but the others that are out there that may be an influence either positively or negatively. Understanding who these people are will help you develop your communication plan and brainstorm on negative and positive risks to the project. The PMP is your toolbox to managing the project. It should include whatever is needed in order to plan, execute, monitor, and control, and close your project. I have utilized or developed all of these during my career, but as a minimum, I have always used the three I have listed. The point here is not about having standards for everything, but having standards for the things that help you manage your project most successfully. From my experience, organizational standards have always added value to helping the organization work as a unit. Keeping things standard adds to efficiency in all measures of performance. However, having processes that do not add value reduce efficiency. I have developed from the quality management system and various organizational processes in a startup company, and the QMS is the foundation that all processes are developed from. The project scope is carried on from the charter. This is where the real work of planning is done. Every element of the scope statement is critical when considering the future performance of the project. It can't be stressed enough how important it is to making sure you have a solid baseline of the project for each of these processes. Some of the details I will cover in this presentation will address how I developed some of these processes for my projects. The project lifecycle is unique to each project, but it should be noted that it clearly mimics the project management process as defined by the PMBOK. The PLC sets the sequence of activities and is usually developed in a way where the end of a phase is measured and is considered a gate before moving into the next phase. In my experience, a PLC includes gates that are key milestones, such as a formal planning review in government and aerospace programs called the Integrated Baseline Review, and other gates which include the preliminary design and critical design review and test readiness review. But as with everything in project management, the PLC needs to be tailored specifically to the project. The project schedule is the product that comes from everything done to this point. If the groundwork has been done, the development of the schedule is nothing more than basically filling in the data. It is important to note something key to schedule development. If you want to use it to measure earned value with respect to schedule and cost, you need to include the work to be performed, which is sometimes different than the duration. And for cost management, you need to include resources and their applicable cost rates. Without resources and cost rates, you will not be able to measure cost variance very accurately. In many cases, however, the cost cannot be managed because the organization is not set up for individuals charging to specific projects or WBS elements. I've worked at companies that do both methods, and I've found that a payroll system that accounts for charges should be required for projects that have moderate to high risk. So now I'll look at some of the key areas that I have used to allow for accurate planning and monitoring control of projects. Estimating is very important in proposal and project planning. And in most respects, you are estimating work relative to tasks, which yields itself to costs associated with the project. Now, of course, you are also estimating costs of materials, subcontracts and facilities, and other, and these represent the same scrutiny to estimating as does the work. But if you are in an organization that is designing, developing, building, and testing, most of your work will be done internally to the organization. So I've developed some tools, as I call them, to help me perform various tasks in project management. We'll go through each one of these. The first one will be project organization, and then estimating, resources, and metrics. So for project organization, it's important to provide information to your stakeholders, specifically your team and some of the internal stakeholders, to provide them abilities to move around to the processes or tools or methodologies that you're using in the way you're managing your project. So in this case, I have some flow diagrams. In this particular one, I've developed a flow diagram that defines the process of developing a printed circuit board, which is utilizing the organizational process. Each block links to procedures, work instructions, and custom notes that help the individual move through the PCB development process. In this next one, it's still an interactive flow diagram. I developed a tool that allows individuals to link to organizational processes that are associated with the phases of the project. The important takeaway from these interactive flow diagrams is to develop methods that help minimize ambiguity and maximize on project efficiency. It really comes down to communication. Providing clarity to stakeholders is the ultimate goal here. Okay, so the next section is estimating, and estimating is done in various ways, and what I've got here are a couple different macros developed in forms. One of them is to help develop a custom printed circuit board, and on the right side is the time needed for a project engineer or control account manager to put into a project or their work package. They utilize parametric analogous and expert opinion within the criteria for each. This section is for the resources. Now, resources, of course, are important in understanding how they are managed throughout the project. So this macro-driven tool pulls into Excel resources-loaded project plans from multiple projects. Its main purpose is to help address overburdened and underburdened resources amongst projects running simultaneously. What usually happens after an analysis of this is that all associated project managers review their plans to see if they can either move some tasks or use underburdened individuals for their projects. Plans change, so this is typically ran routinely. The next section is metrics. Now, what this macro-driven tool does is compare plan to actual hours spent on various WBS elements for multiple projects. It's important that a standard WBS is utilized for this to work, but the idea is to look at various WBS elements and determine if they are being under or overestimated during planning. The reason to look at multiple projects is that often there are similarities in estimating from various departments and disciplines. So the data displayed here was copied over to another project for the purpose of presentation only. It's not likely that you would ever see variations to be the same amongst multiple projects as shown in this particular slide. So what we have looked at so far are some of the tools I developed to help in the estimating and help in providing a clear communication to the project team and other stakeholders. So these tools that I'm going to look at next are more about managing the project on the performance with respect to cost and schedule. So, performance is measured in many ways, but when it comes to measuring to schedule and budget, earned value is a very good tool. And from my experience, actual performance, thus how much money has been spent to a project, is not always readily available because it is controlled by the business unit. You may not get a performance report until the end of the month or quarter, which is usually not sufficient for you to be able to manage your project on a daily basis. So these macro-driven tools are driven by pulling into Excel actual data from the accounting system and plan data from the schedule. This tool will only work if you are given access to the actual data from the accounting system. In this case, I pulled data from CostPoint. So the first tool we'll look at here is looking at plan versus actual. This report provides a snapshot of the plan versus the actual with respect to individuals. This report does two things very well. It looks at how an individual that was planned to do work on your project is performing. This says the planned individual is either not working this activity, or maybe someone else is, or that individual has overspent or underspent in that activity. This next option in the macro is the report simply looks at the actual versus the planned work performed for each high-level WBS. It does not take into account who charged to the project, only how much was charged to date and how much was planned to date. The next one is a report that is unique because it looks at the actual versus planned dollars spent for each high-level WBS. The main takeaway from this report is to tell you what pay grade individual has worked your project. It requires that an actual to plan report with respect to hours is ran and the actual is close to plan. If that is the case and the report says there is a negative variance, then possibly a higher or lower paid individual performed that work. Obviously you as a project manager are aware if someone else is performing work, but with this report you can see on a high level if this brings concern to meeting the budget. This next report option that you have within this macro is to look at the schedule performance index, which is used to tell you if your project is on schedule or not. If your index is less than 1, you may have reason for concern. However, this should be weighed against your cost performance index and other indicators as well. So as with the SPI, this index tells you if you're on track to meeting the budget. Anything greater or equal to 1 is good, and below is something you may need to be concerned about. One thing to note, by looking at SPI and CPI, is that you can sometimes address a negative of 1 with a positive of another. If your SPI is less than 1 and your CPI is greater than 1, you may have the ability to deal with the problem by adding more resources to a task in order to fix the schedule. Another thing you can do with this report is to look at the estimate at completion for a project that is expected to continue as planned. So this last option within this report macro is to be able to look at a performance graph. So the performance graph tool is really one of my favorites because it develops a performance report for both hours and dollars spent relative to plan. So that was a look over some of the tools that I've developed to help minimize my time required to analyze project performance so I can spend more time with the project customers and the project others, the stakeholders and the project team more specifically. So this next section is about risk, and risk is as equally important of a subject as looking at the planning as I've emphasized during most of this presentation. I think risk is something that is critically ongoing activity that is so often overlooked. And these are two critical elements to managing risk: identifying and weighing risk and managing closure to risk. Identifying risk starts with defining key criteria for impact with respect to various categories of risk. So as an example, the impact of a schedule slip for a short delivery project may mean a high risk is a slip of 5 days, where it may be 20 days for a project where some crashing or other method could be used to address the risk. So another key point is that risks are not always identified by the obvious stakeholders, project team and customer, but are often pointed out by other stakeholders such as technicians, human resources, sourcing, and others. Therefore, it's important to include as many as possible when looking for risks. Another key point is that not all risks are negative. In some cases, you can incorporate something that will add value to the project but is not yet in scope. But the most important thing about risk management is that it is something that is constantly being addressed. Just like your daily activities in your plan, I make it a point to review risks in my weekly team meetings and provide feedback on them in all reports. So up to this point, we have covered some of the areas that I feel are the most critical to managing a project for a successful completion. The final phase of a project is the closing of a project. And I think all I want to say that parts from the obvious here is that lessons learned need to be completed at this phase, and lessons learned should have been cataloged throughout the life of the project, but at this point they should be formally documented and made available for other project managers and for your future projects. So thank you for taking the time to watch this presentation, and I hope that it has educated you on at least how I see some of the activities that are critical to managing a project for a successful completion, but also how organizational standards and tools can help minimize your time in managing the performance of a project so more time can be allocated to the most important part of project management, and that is communication. Thanks again for taking the time. Have a good day.